It was a quiet evening in the small town of Willow Creek, where the streets were lined with cobblestones, and the scent of blooming jasmine lingered in the air. Emma had just finished her shift at the local bookstore, the tiny bell above the door jingling softly as she stepped out into the twilight. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft pink hue painted across the sky. She loved this time of day. It felt magical, like anything could happen. Emma adjusted her scarf and started walking toward her favorite spot by the river. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could let her thoughts drift with the gentle current. Tonight, though, she couldn't shake the memory of the stranger who had wandered into the bookstore earlier that afternoon. He had been tall, with unruly dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 stories. He'd browsed the shelves with an air of quiet curiosity, finally settling on a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. When he'd handed it to her at the counter, their fingers had brushed, and a spark had passed between them, a spark she couldn't ignore. "Do you believe in love at first sight?" he'd asked out of nowhere, his voice soft but steady. Emma had blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I think it's more about the connection you feel," she'd replied, her cheeks warming. "Why do you ask?" He'd smiled then, a crooked, endearing smile that made her heart skip a beat. "Just curious." She hadn't even gotten his name. As Emma reached the riverbank, she noticed someone sitting on the bench where she usually sat. Her heart gave a little leap when she recognized him. It was the stranger from the bookstore. "Fancy meeting you here," he said, turning to face her. His voice carried the same warmth it had earlier, and it made her feel as though they were old friends. "This is my favorite spot," Emma admitted, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. "I didn't expect to see anyone else here, especially not you." "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, standing up. "I just moved to town and stumbled upon this place. It's beautiful." "It is," she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated for a moment before adding, "I'm Emma, by the way." "Liam," he said, extending a hand. When she shook it, his touch was warm and grounding, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. They ended up sitting on the bench together, talking as the stars began to dot the night sky. Liam told her about his move to Willow Creek, how he'd grown tired of city life and wanted to find a place where he could breathe again. Emma shared stories about her life in the small town, her love for books, and her dream of writing one someday. Hours passed like minutes, and by the time Emma realized how late it had gotten, the moon was high above them, casting a silvery glow over the river. "I should probably get going," she said reluctantly, standing up. "Let me walk you home," Liam offered. There was no hesitation in his voice, just a quiet assurance that made her feel safe. As they walked through the sleepy streets, their conversation flowed effortlessly. Emma found herself laughing at Liam's stories and marveling at the way he seemed to see the world, with a sense of wonder she hadn't encountered in a long time. When they reached her door, she turned to him, unsure of what to say. "Thank you for tonight," she said finally. "It's been a while since I've had such a good conversation." "The pleasure's all mine," he replied, his gaze lingering on her face. For a moment, it looked like he wanted to say something else, but instead, he just smiled and took a step back. "Good night, Emma." "Good night, Liam," she said, her heart fluttering as she watched him walk away. Over the next few weeks, Emma and Liam's paths seemed to cross more and more. He'd show up at the bookstore, always with a question about a book or a recommendation he'd read about. They'd sit by the river, sharing their thoughts on life, love, and everything in between. Slowly but surely, a bond began to form, one that felt as natural as breathing. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves painted the town in shades of gold and crimson, Liam invited Emma to a local fair. The air was filled with the aroma of caramel apples and roasted chestnuts, and the sound of laughter echoed around them as they wandered from booth to booth. Liam won her a small stuffed bear at one of the games, and Emma couldn't help but tease him about his competitive streak. "I couldn't let you leave empty-handed," he said with a grin, handing her the bear. Well, thank you, she said, her eyes twinkling. I'll treasure it forever. As the evening wore on, they found themselves on the Ferris wheel. The town spread out below them like a glittering tapestry. The ride came to a stop when their car was at the top, leaving them suspended in the air. Emma shivered slightly as a cool breeze swept past, and Liam shrugged off his jacket, draping it over her shoulders. You didn't have to do that, she said, touched by the gesture. I wanted to, he replied simply. His voice was soft, but it carried a weight that made her heart skip a beat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath as they sat there, the stars twinkling above them and the town's lights shimmering below. When Emma turned to look at Liam, she found him already watching her, his expression unreadable. Emma, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. There's something about you that makes me feel alive, like I've been waiting my whole life to meet you. Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she leaned in, her heart pounding as their faces drew closer. And then, as if the universe had orchestrated it, their lips met. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as though they were both afraid to break the spell. But it deepened quickly, an outpouring of all the emotions they'd been holding back. It was a kiss that spoke of new beginnings, of hope and possibility. It was a kiss that melted away the world around them, leaving only the two of them in their own little universe. When they finally pulled apart, Emma's cheeks were flushed, and her eyes shone with a mix of joy and disbelief. Liam reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering. I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you, he admitted, his voice husky. Emma laughed softly, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. I'm glad you did. The Ferris wheel began to move again, but neither of them noticed. They were too caught up in each other, in the magic of that moment. It was a kiss that neither of them would ever forget, a kiss that marked the beginning of something extraordinary.